Okay, geometry students, welcome to the video today. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be looking today at parallel lines and transversals. So go ahead and write that in your notes if you would please. Parallel lines and transversals, lesson 3.5. Be sure and include today's date if you would please. We're going to be looking today at parallel lines and transversals. Okay, now remember in the past we looked at lines that were being intersected by a transversal like this. Okay, but now we're going to be looking at parallel lines. So now the two lines will be parallel and they're going to be cut by a transversal. Okay, even though my parallel lines don't look very good, hopefully you get the idea. All right, so here we go. Parallel lines and transversals, lesson 3.5, and please be sure and include today's date. Okay, I'm not sure why this thing's hanging around right here. Let me see if I can get rid of it real quick here, students, if you'll give me a second. There we go. Very good. And let's go ahead and continue on. Parallel lines and transversals, lesson 3.5. Now, we are going to be studying today 4 different characteristics of angles that are formed by parallel lines and a transversal. Let me say that again. You don't need to write this down, but listen. We are going to be studying today 4 different characteristics of angles that are formed by 2 parallel lines and a transversal. Okay, and so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, all geometry books, as far as I know, teach these 4 principles by giving 4 theorems, and this book does the same thing, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm going to make this a lot easier on you guys, and instead of giving you 4 theorems, I'm going to give you just the 4 principles listed out for you, okay, which will really make it a lot easier than learning 4 theorems. All right, so here we go. All right, I'm going to list out the 4 principles and you'll be quizzed and tested on these, so make sure you really learn them. Okay, here we go. If 2 parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then these 4 principles are true. And I'm going to go ahead and get a little picture up here if you'll give me a second to do that. And I would encourage you to write this down if I were you. All right, go ahead and do that. I'm going to quickly 1, 2 number these angles. I would encourage you to do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I should have already had this done. I apologize. 5, 6, 7, 8. Now let me quickly copy this. All right, and I think we're good. All right, now here we go. Please pay attention, students. If 2, write this down, please. Put this in your notes. If 2 parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then these 4 principles are true. So please write this down. Copy this in your notes. If 2 parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then these 4 principles are true. So here we go. Here's the first one. All right. Alternate interior angles are congruent. So please write that down. Now students, go ahead and put a parallel symbol, a little triangle here, and a little triangle here. And what that means is these 2 lines are parallel. We'll call it L and M. Okay, so we're going to say that L is parallel to M. Now listen, students, if 2 parallel lines are cut by a transversal, then their alternate interior angles will always be congruent. Okay, always. So here's my 2 parallel lines. They're cut by a transversal. These angles will be will be congruent. Please copy this down. Angle 3 would be congruent to angle 6. And angle 5 would be congruent to angle 4, because 3 and 6 are alternate interior angles and 4 and 5 are alternate interior angles. Okay, so please make note of that in your notes. When 2 parallel lines are cut by a transversal, alternate interior angles will be congruent. Okay, hold on 1 second. That's my cell phone going off. And let's continue on. Okay, now also we know that when 2 parallel lines are cut by a transversal, alternate exterior angles are congruent. Okay, got it, students? So once again, we have parallel lines. Okay, parallel lines, and you don't need to draw this figure again. I'm just simply saying we have parallel lines. cut by transversal, and so we know for sure that alternate exterior angles are congruent. So we know that 1 is congruent to 8 because 1 and 8 are alternate exterior angles, and we know that 2 and 7 are congruent because 2 and 7 are alternate exterior angles. So we're going to put angle 1 is congruent to angle 8, and angle 2 is congruent to angle 7. All right? So once again, for the third or fourth time, if two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, the alternate interior angles are congruent and the alternate exterior angles are congruent. Okay? All right, moving on to principle number 3. Whenever two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, not only are the alternate interior angles congruent and the alternate exterior angles congruent, also the corresponding angles are congruent. Okay, so the corresponding angles would be 1 and 5, 2 and 6, 3 and 7, and 4 and 8. Okay, so if your two lines are parallel and they're cut by a transversal, corresponding angles are congruent. So I would write this down if I were you. I would put angle 1 is congruent to angle 5, angle 2 is congruent to angle 6, angle 3 is congruent to angle 7, and angle 4 is congruent to angle 8. Okay, so if two parallel lines are cut by transversal, corresponding angles are congruent. Now, principle number 4. Notice these angles are not congruent. Please don't miss this, students. Okay, let me go back real quick and move this around. Hold on one second. Slide this up just a little. There we go. Now, students, listen. Consecutive interior angles, or we call them same side interior angles, they're not congruent. Okay, they are not. They are supplementary. So when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, the consecutive interior angles, or we also call those the same side interior angles, they are not necessarily congruent. They're supplementary. Okay, so angle 3 and angle 5 are supplementary. Angle 4 and angle 6 are supplementary. Okay, now the only time that angles 3 and 5 would be congruent is if they're both 90. And the only time that angles 4 and 6 would be congruent is when they're both 90. Okay, so let's quickly review. If two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, the alternate interior angles will always be congruent. The alternate exterior angles will always be congruent. The corresponding angles will be congruent. And the consecutive interior angles, or we also call them the same side interior angles, are not congruent. Well, they might be. They might be if they're both 90, but they will always be supplementary. Okay? So please know this. Please write this down, students, and please memorize these 4 principles. Okay? You need to know those. It's very, very important. All right? Okay, let's continue on. Now, I would like you to write this problem in your notes if you would, please. Go ahead and draw two parallel lines cut by a transversal and label this angle here 60 degrees and this angle here is angle number 1. Okay? And I would like us to find the measure of angle 1. Okay? The measure of angle 1. Now, notice, students, we have two parallel lines and they're cut by a transversal. Notice also that angle 60 degrees and angle number 1 are both corresponding angles. Okay? And so we just learned that when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, corresponding angles are congruent. So this angle here and this angle here are congruent. So the measure of angle 1 will be 60 degrees, okay? Because they're corresponding angles and because you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Okay? But remember, this is not true unless these two lines are parallel lines, okay? All right, let's continue on. Please copy this in your notes. Copy two parallel lines if you would, please, and then draw this transversal. Okay, now look what we have, students. We have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Do you see that? So, if we have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, we have this angle here and this angle here. Now, those two angles are called alternate interior, if I can get my pen to work here, alternate interior angles. And we learned back here that alternate interior angles are congruent when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal. So if this angle here is 35 degrees, then this angle right here is also 35 degrees. So x equals 35 degrees. Again, students, remember, when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, alternate interior angles will be congruent, okay? All right, copy this in your notes if you would, please. Parallel line going this way, parallel line going this way, and a transversal going this way. All right, please copy that in your notes. Now, while you're copying that, I want to give you a little advice here, students, okay? I would advise you, whenever possible, I would always take your sheet of paper and turn it, or take your book and turn it, or take a test and a quiz and turn it so that your parallel lines are running horizontally like that. It really helps you see the angles better. Now that's my advice to you, students. You might not like that idea, and you might rather leave it like that, which is fine. For me, I would rather have my parallel lines running horizontally because it helps me see the angles a little easier. Okay, so there we go. Now, look what we have here, students. We're trying to find the measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 2. Now, please look carefully, students, okay? Notice that this is 75 degrees. Well, first of all, notice I have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Notice this angle here and angle number 2 are what we call alternate exterior angles. Okay, and look back here. We learned that alternate exterior angles are congruent when you have two parallel lines cut by transversals. So if this angle up here is 75 degrees, then the measure of angle 2 also has to be 75 degrees because they're alternate exterior angles. Now, look at this, students, also. I have a straight line here with a line coming off of it. So this angle right here and this angle over here are a linear pair. Do you see that? We have a straight line right here with a line coming off of it. So we have a linear pair. Remember, linear pairs are always supplementary. So angle 1 is going to have to be 105 degrees. Do you see that? Okay, because 105 plus 75 is 180. And these two angles right here have to add up to 180, okay? So the measure of angle 1 will be 105. Let's go over this again. Alternate exterior angles are congruent, 75 and 75. A linear pair where you have a straight line and a line coming off of it, linear pairs are always supplementary. So 75 plus 105 is 180, okay? All right, let's continue on to the next problem. Please copy this in your notes if you would, please, students. Excuse me. Go ahead and copy a parallel line, and a transversal, okay? Now, notice, students, we have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. notice we're dealing with two angles here. Notice we're trying to find the measure of angle 5. Now, what is the name of these two angles? Well, they're called, remember, consecutive interior angles, or this book calls them same side interior angles. Okay, same side interior angles. And what did we learn about consecutive interior angles or same side interior angles? They're not necessarily congruent. They could be if they're both 90, but they're always supplementary. Always. Okay, so these two angles here have to add up to 180 because they're consecutive interior angles. So if this angle here is 80, then angle 5 has to be 130 degrees. Okay, or excuse me, I'm sorry, 100 degrees. Sorry about that. 100 degrees, because 100 plus 80 is 180 degrees. All right, let's try another problem. All right, now let's get into a little bit of algebra, okay? Again, for me, every student's different. I like the problems I'm doing, I like parallel lines to run horizontal. That's me, so there we go. Go ahead and copy this in your notes if you would, please. And look what we have here, students. We have two parallel lines here and here cut by a transversal. Okay. Now look at the two angles we're given. This angle here and this angle here, they're alternate interior angles. And we know what we just learned right here. Alternate interior angles are congruent when you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Okay, so with that in mind, that means this angle here and this angle here have to be congruent or equal. So I can definitely state that x plus 35 equals 120 degrees. There it is, because this angle here is congruent to this angle here. Now bring your 35 over and make it a negative 35, and you're left with 85 degrees, or excuse me, 85 for x. Okay, 85. X equals 85. There we go. Not too hard, guys. Okay, because right where the x is, if you put an 85 right there, 85 plus 35 is 120, and this angle should be 120 because this angle down here is 120 degrees. Okay, all right, continuing on, I think to our next to last problem. Okay, let's solve for x. Now again, for me, students, I like my diagrams to be turned so that the parallel lines are horizontal. So there we go. Now look what I've got, students. I've got two parallel lines. Go ahead and copy this in your notes if you would, please. Two parallel lines cut by a transversal. This is 78 and this is x minus 2. Now, the names of these two angles here are called consecutive interior angles, or same side interior angles. And I told you guys the day we went over these types of angles, I said to you then, make sure you memorize these well and make sure you're familiar with what these angles are called. Alternate interior, alternate exterior, consecutive interior, corresponding angles. All of these different types of angles are important because you have to be able to recognize them very quickly. Okay, so look at your notes. What do we know about two parallel lines cut by a transversal? What do we know about consecutive interior angles or same side interior angles? We know they're supplementary, right? Look at your notes, you'll see that. So we know if we take this angle here and this angle here and we do what to them? Add them together, they have to equal 180 because they're supplementary. So x minus 2 is one angle, the other angle is 78, so plus 78 equals 180. Now, we cannot simplify the right side, but we can simplify the left side. I've got a constant term here and a constant term here. So a negative 2 and a positive 78 would be 76. So x plus 76 equals 180. And then bring the 76 over and make it a negative 76. And x equals 180 and 4. And students, that makes sense because if you put 104 right here for x and take 2 away, you get 102. And 102 plus 78 is 180. Okay, so I took this angle here, excuse me, and this angle here, and I added them together, and they equaled 180. And then I solved for x. Okay? All right, one more problem and we're finished. Please go ahead and copy this into your notes, students, if you would. And yes, we are to assume this line here is parallel to this line here, okay? I should have had that written down, so go ahead and copy this in your notes. And then for me, I would much rather have the parallel lines run horizontally like this. So there we go. Now students, please look at what I have, okay? Look, I have two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Now this problem's a little confusing, so bear with me. Look, you're like, oh, Mr. Earhart, this angle here and this angle here, they're alternate interior. Nope. Okay, they're alternate exterior. Nope. Okay, they're consecutive interior. Nope. Oh, they're corresponding. Nope. These two angles don't have any correlation at all. But here's what we do know. Use previous knowledge. We know that when you have perpendicular lines like we do here, we learned that perpendicular lines form 4 right angles. So if I have a right angle here, then I also have a right angle here. And if I have a right angle here, that means this angle right here is what? 90 degrees. Now, I do have a name for this angle here and this angle here. They're called alternate interior angles. So when two lines are cut by a transversal in such a way that they're, or excuse me, when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal, their alternate interior angles are congruent. So this angle here and this angle here are congruent. So I can take my one angle, 90, and set it equal to, excuse me, the other angle, which is 2x plus 10. And now I'm ready to solve for x. So bring the 10 over and make it a negative 10. The 10's gone. 90 minus 10 is 80. So 80 equals 2x. And then divide by 2, and you're left with 40. So there, just like that, we solve for x, okay? And that's basically it. These are the types of problems you're going to be doing in this lesson, okay? So once again, the main thing you need to remember today is this. When two parallel lines, they have to be parallel. If the two line students are not parallel, then you cannot assume that any of this is true. Okay, it might be or it might not be. You don't know. Okay, but if you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, then these 4 principles are true. The alternate interior angles are congruent. The alternate exterior angles are congruent. The corresponding angles are congruent. And the consecutive interior angles or same side interior angles are supplementary. And that's it. Okay? Alright. I hope this video has made sense. I hope it's been a help to you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call or email.